In China, there is a place where the land no longer behaves like land. Thousands of stone towers rise straight into the sky, with no slopes, no ridges, and no visible connection to the ground below. Some climb over 1,000 feet, and when the fog moves in, their bases disappear completely. They don't look built. They don't look stable. And yet, they're still standing. This is not how a landscape is supposed to remain standing. So the question is, what removed everything else? To understand it, you don't start with what you see. You start with what's missing. Because most landscapes can be read. You can follow their slopes, trace their ridges, and understand how one form leads into another. But here, that continuity is gone. Not because it never existed, but because it was removed. Zhangjiajie is not a mountain range in the traditional sense. It is what remains after an entire landscape has been taken apart, piece by piece, across immense spans of time. And once you recognize that, the question is no longer what you're looking at, but what survived. Chapter 1. Zhangjiajie. Zhangjiajie does not unfold gradually. The shift is immediate. The ground gives way to verticality, and the landscape breaks into thousands of stone pillars rising directly from dense forest, each one standing alone, separated by narrow voids where the rest of the land once existed. Many of these formations rise between 600 and over 1,000 feet, but height is not what defines them. It is separation. There are no ridgelines connecting them, no slopes explaining how they formed, only vertical stone, rising where continuity should exist. From above, the pillars seem structured. From below, they disappear into fog. And somewhere between those two perspectives, the landscape stops making sense. But this is where it changes, because this was not always fragmented. Hundreds of millions of years ago, this entire region was part of a continuous sandstone plateau, formed from layers of sediment deposited beneath ancient seas. It was whole, connected, and then it was lifted. When tectonic forces pushed that plateau above sea level, it became exposed, and from that moment, the process began. Water entered the rock, widening fractures over time. Temperature shifts expanded those fractures further. Sections weakened, and eventually, they collapsed. But erosion does not act evenly. Some parts of the plateau broke faster, disappeared earlier. Others denser, more resistant remained. And over millions of years, that difference became everything. Because what you see today is not what was built. It is what time failed to erase. Each pillar is a remnant of that original plateau, preserved not by design, but by resistance. And this is where the experience shifts again. Because Zhangjiajie is not defined by what it contains, but by what it has lost. The human eye depends on continuity to understand space. Slopes define elevation. Connections define distance. Here, those references are gone. And then the atmosphere removes even more. Warm air rises from the forest below, carrying moisture upward. As it cools, fog forms dense enough to erase the lower half of the landscape. The forest disappears. The ground disappears. The base of the pillars vanishes completely. Only their upper sections remain visible, suspended above a layer of cloud. Not because they are floating, but because the information needed to understand them is gone. And that absence creates the illusion, not a violation of natural law, but a removal of the visual cues that make landscapes readable. Zhangjiajie does not distort reality. It reveals it more completely. It shows what happens when erosion is allowed to continue long enough to remove everything except the most stable forms. In most places, landscapes are observed earlier in that process. Here, you are seeing a later stage. a more complete version. A terrain where continuity has already been lost and only resistance remains. But Zhangjiajie is only the first fracture in this world, because further ahead the land does something even stranger. It opens a doorway through the mountain itself. Chapter 2. Mount Tianmen. The climb begins immediately. 999 steps rise in a straight line toward a gap carved into the mountain, each one steep, narrow, and exposed. There is no gradual ascent. The body is forced upward while the valley drops away behind it, and at the top, the mountain does not end, it opens. The structure ahead does not behave like a peak. It interrupts itself. A vast opening cuts directly through the fountain, large enough to dominate the entire summit, as if the rock has been removed at the exact point where it should be strongest. And this is where the landscape breaks expectation, because mountains are defined by accumulation. They rise, they build mass, they resist collapse. Here, the opposite happens. The mountain gives way. Known as Heaven's Gate, this natural arch stands approximately 430 feet high and nearly 190 feet wide, large enough to reshape the entire perception of the mountain itself. From a distance, it appears almost flat, but as you climb, that scale begins to shift. The opening expands, the edges sharpen, the void deepens. And the closer you get, the less it feels like an erosion feature, and the more it feels deliberate. But that illusion is exactly what makes it powerful, because nothing here was designed. The arch formed through collapse, erosion, and structural weakness acting together over time, removing just enough material to create a passage without destroying the mountain itself. And that balance is precise. Remove less and the opening never forms. Remove more and the structure fails completely. What remains is the exact point between those extremes, and reaching it is not passive. Each step of the staircase is uniform, steep enough to break rhythm and narrow enough to demand attention. The climb does not allow momentum. It forces awareness of movement, of height, of exposure. The valley behind you drops away with each step. The air begins to shift. Wind moves upward along the face of the mountain, accelerating as it approaches the narrowing space of the arch. And then, without transition, you are no longer approaching the mountain. You are inside it. And this is where the experience changes again. Because the arch does not frame the sky, it divides it. On one side, the slope you climbed. On the other, open air falling away into the valley below. Wind passes continuously through the opening, creating a low, constant pressure that can be felt across the body. Temperature shifts, sound changes, light no longer behaves consistently. It moves across the opening, altering depth and distance depending on where you stand. The mountain is no longer a solid mass. It becomes a threshold. And that shift from structure to passage is what defines Tianmen. Because this is not just a formation you observe. It is one you move through. And that movement changes perception, not just of space, but of position. Because standing within that opening, the landscape no longer feels stable. It feels transitional, as if you are not standing on the mountain, but passing between two conditions of it. And that perception is not new. For centuries, this place has been interpreted as a point of connection between realms, not because of mythology alone, but because the structure itself suggests it. A mountain that does not simply rise, but opens. A path that does not go around, but through. A space that does not hold you, but moves you forward. And like Zhangjiajie, the power of Tianmen lies in what it reveals. Not an exception to natural processes, but a more complete expression of them. Because erosion does not only remove, sometimes it exposes weakness in ways that create entirely new forms. Forms that do not just change the shape of the land, but redefine how it is experienced. But even this passage through solid rock is not the most extreme transformation of the landscape. Because further ahead, the ground itself begins to change state, not breaking apart, not opening, but hardening from fire, into a structure that still carries the memory of its own formation. Chapter 3. Yandang Mountains. The rock here was never meant to be still. 120 million years ago, this ground was molten forced upward through the Earth's crust under extreme pressure, cooling slowly into dense rhyolite that fractured as it hardened. What remains is not the surface of a volcano, but its interior, exposed, and that changes everything. Because this landscape was not shaped quietly, it was built through force. Located along China's eastern coast, the Yandang Mountains did not form through gradual uplift alone. They began with eruption repeated, violent releases of pressure that pushed molten rock upward in cycles, reshaping the surface again and again. But unlike fluid lava flows that spread outward, rhyolite behaves differently. It resists movement, it builds pressure, and when that pressure releases, it fractures. And those fractures never disappear. They remain inside the rock long after it cools, which means what you see today is not a volcano, but what was left behind after everything else was removed. The outer layers collapsed, the ash dispersed, softer material eroded away. What remains is the hardened core, a structure shaped not just by eruption, but by survival. And that survival creates a landscape that behaves differently from anything before it. The mountains here do not rise cleanly. They do not fragment into pillars. They split into jagged ridges, vertical cliffs, and deep cuts where erosion has followed the internal fracture lines left behind by volcanic pressure. From a distance, the terrain looks irregular. Up close, it feels unstable. Not because it is collapsing, but because it was never smooth to begin with. Every surface reflects stress. Every ridge follows a line of force that once moved beneath the earth. But this is where the landscape becomes physical. Because here, structure does not just shape what you see, it controls how everything moves through it. Water does not spread evenly, it follows fractures. Air does not flow freely, it compresses between ridges. Sound does not disperse, it reflects. And nowhere is that more precise than at the Small Dragon waterfall. At just under 200 feet, it is not among the largest waterfalls in China, but its placement is exact. It emerges from a narrow vertical cut in the rock formed along a fracture created during the cooling of the volcanic system itself. That fracture became a channel. And over time, water refined it. Not into a wide cascade, but into a controlled descent. A single column of water dropping directly through the rock. The sound does not fade outward, it stays contained, echoing upward between the walls that created it. You hear it before you fully see it. And when you stand near it, the impact is not just visual, it's physical. Because the landscape does not absorb the force, it returns it. And that pattern repeats everywhere here. Nothing is isolated. Every element, rock, water, air, moves according to a structure that was defined millions of years ago. But there is another layer, less visible but still present. Because parts of Yandang contain subtle magnetic variations caused by minerals within the volcanic rock aligning differently as the lava cooled. These variations are small, but measurable. Compasses can shift slightly, readings can drift. Not enough to disorient completely, but enough to register. And that matters. Not because it changes navigation, but because it confirms something deeper. That this landscape is not passive. It still carries the imprint of internal forces. Forces that shaped it and never fully disappeared. This is not a mountain range. It is a 120 million-year-old volcanic system, still holding its structure in place, and that changes how you experience it. Because instead of observing something stable, you begin to sense something ongoing. Not movement, but tension. Not instability, but memory. A landscape that does not collapse, but never fully rests. But even here, where the Earth feels most active, another shift is waiting. Because further inland, the land rises again. Not through pressure, not through fracture, but into isolation. Into a place where almost nothing moves at all. Chapter 4. Fanjingshan. Fanjingshan stands alone above the surrounding land. More than 65 million years old, this formation was lifted and preserved while everything around it eroded away, leaving a single mass of rock isolated at altitude, often surrounded entirely by cloud. There is no range extending from it. No gradual transition, only separation. And that separation changes how the mountain is experienced. Because this is not something you enter from within a landscape. It feels removed from it, as if it belongs to a different stage of the Earth's history, one that remained intact while everything else was worn down and replaced. But the isolation is only the beginning. The path upward does not reveal the mountain all at once. It withholds it. More than 8,000 stone steps climb through dense forest, rising in sections that limit visibility, forcing the ascent to unfold gradually. You do not see the summit from below. You move towards something you cannot fully measure. And as elevation increases, the environment begins to shift. The air cools, the vegetation thins, sound fades, until the mountain reduces itself to its essential elements: rock, height, and exposure. And this is where the structure reveals itself. Near the summit, the terrain tightens into a vertical formation known as the Red Cloud's Golden Summit. A single column of rock split into two narrow peaks by a deep fissure, rising sharply above the surrounding terrain. From a distance, it appears too thin to hold, too exposed to remain stable, but it does. Because this is metamorphic rock, compressed, hardened, and reinforced over immense spans of time, capable of supporting forms that appear structurally unlikely. And that strength is what allows something even more unexpected to exist here. At the very top, spanning the gap between the two peaks, there is a bridge. And on either side of that bridge, two temples. Small, minimal, positioned at the most exposed point of the mountain. And this is where the experience shifts again, because nothing about this location suggests permanence. Wind accelerates through the gap between the peaks, moving continuously across the summit. Clouds form and dissolve without pattern, often surrounding the structure entirely, isolating it from the world below. Visibility changes within minutes. Distance becomes difficult to judge, and yet the structures remain. Not because the environment is stable, but because the placement is intentional. For centuries, this site has held spiritual significance, seen not simply as a high point, but as a point of separation from everything below it. But even without that context, the question remains, why here? Why at the most exposed edge of the mountain? Why at a location defined by difficulty, by isolation, by absence? And that question becomes part of the landscape itself. because reaching this point is not passive. The climb removes distraction. The altitude reduces comfort. The environment narrows focus, until what remains is not the mountain but your position within it. This is how Fanjingshan operates. Not through scale, not through fragmentation, but through reduction. It removes everything unnecessary and leaves only what can exist within strict limits. And within those limits, life still adapts. The Guizhou golden snub-nosed monkey survives here, confined to this narrow ecological range, shaped by the same conditions that define the mountain itself. Isolation does not remove life. It selects it, and that is the deeper structure of this place. Not emptiness, but precision. A system where only what can endure remains. Everything else disappears. And after landscapes shaped by collapse, by pressure, by eruption, this is something different. Not force, not movement, but stillness. A point where the land no longer transforms rapidly, but holds its position against time. But that stillness is not the end of the journey, because beyond these heights, the landscape changes direction entirely. It does not rise, it does not fracture, it dissolves into something sharper, denser, and far more difficult to navigate. Chapter 5. Shilin. The ground fractures into blades. Limestone rises in narrow, jagged formations, some over 100 feet tall, their edges sharpened into vertical ridges that cut through the landscape in every direction. There is no open terrain, only stone, splitting, closing in, forming corridors so tight that movement becomes deliberate. This is not a forest of trees. It is a 270 million-year-old seabed turned into a labyrinth, because this place did not begin as land. During the Permian period, this entire region lay beneath a shallow tropical sea, where layers of shells, coral, and marine life settled and compressed into thick beds of limestone. For millions of years, it remained undisturbed. And then the sea disappeared. The land rose, and everything changed. But the transformation was not violent. It was slow, relentless. Rainwater absorbed carbon dioxide, forming a weak acid that slowly dissolves the limestone. And over time, that persistence became structure, because the surface did not collapse evenly. Some sections dissolved completely, others remained, and what survived hardened into shape. But this is where the experience changes, because this is not a landscape you look at, it is one you move through. At ground level, visibility disappears. The stone rises on both sides. Paths narrow. Light breaks unevenly across sharp edges and deep shadows. There is no horizon, only direction, and that direction keeps shifting. The land does not guide you, it redirects you. Every turn leads into another corridor, another division, another wall rising where open space should exist. The landscape folds into itself, and the deeper you move, the less it feels like terrain, and the more it feels like a system designed by removal. Sound behaves differently here. It does not travel outward, it reflects, bends, returns from unexpected directions. Distance becomes unreliable, scale collapses, and orientation begins to fail, but then suddenly clarity. At Sword Peak Pond, the landscape pauses. A still surface of water reflects the limestone blades above it, doubling their height, restoring symmetry if only for a moment. And then it disappears again, broken by movement, distorted by light, lost as you continue forward. And this pattern repeats. Clarity, confusion, direction, loss of direction, until the landscape becomes something else entirely. Not something you observe, but something you navigate. And within that complexity, Meaning begins to emerge. The legend of Ashima tells of a young woman who resisted her fate and was turned to stone, her form preserved within these formations. And whether the story is believed or not, its presence is not accidental, because places like this demand interpretation, not unclear, overwhelming. This is not a landscape built by addition, it is one carved by absence, layer by layer, detail by detail, until only complexity remained. And after mountains that rise, after formations that open, Shilin turns the experience inward, not upward, not outward, but deeper. And yet even this is not the final form, because beyond this maze of stone, the land changes again, not into structure, but into color. Chapter 6. Zhangye Danxia. The earth breaks into color. Bands of red, yellow, and white stretch across entire mountains, folding and curving in patterns that feel too precise to be natural. There are no isolated peaks here, only continuous surfaces, layered and exposed, extending across the horizon. This is not a mountain range. It is a record of time, made visible. These colors are not surface effects, they are structure. Formed during the Cretaceous period, layers of sediment built up over millions of years, each one carrying a different mineral composition. Iron oxidized into red, other minerals introduced yellow, white, and muted tones. Then the land moved. The collision of tectonic plates lifted these layers upward, tilting them, exposing them, transforming what was once flat into something visible. What happened next changed everything. Erosion did not destroy the structure, it revealed it. Wind removed softer material. Rain carved along natural lines of weakness. But the layers remained intact, and as they emerged, the colors intensified, became clearer, more defined. And this is what makes this landscape different. Most erosion simplifies terrain. Here it exposes complexity. From above, the land appears fluid. Color bands flow across ridges, intersect, and continue without interruption, forming patterns that seem almost intentional. But they are not designed. They follow structure. Every curve reflects pressure. Every fold records movement. Every color marks a different moment in geological time. This is not variation, it is chronology, and that changes how the landscape is experienced. Because you are not just looking at it, you are reading it. Time becomes visible, structure becomes information, and scale becomes difficult to process. Because there is no boundary, no single point of reference, only continuity. The land does not break apart, it unfolds, rising in smooth forms that appear almost soft despite the hardness of the rock beneath. And as light moves across it, the landscape changes again. At sunrise, shadows define depth. At midday, contrast flattens. At sunset, the reds intensify, reflecting the same minerals that created them. The structure does not change, but your perception does. This is the final shift. Because this landscape does not challenge natural law. It reveals it at a scale and clarity that feels unfamiliar. This is not a surface shaped by one force. It is the result of time, pressure, and chemistry acting together until the land itself became a visible record of its own creation. This is why it feels like the end of the journey. Not because it is the highest point, but because it is the clearest one. Across China, the land does not follow a single rule. It fractures, it opens, it dissolves, it rises, it isolates. In each form, it reveals a different stage of how the earth evolves. In Zhangjiajie, continuity was removed until only what could survive remained. In Tianmen, the mountain opened, exposing the limits of structure. In Yandang, volcanic force hardened into form, preserving tension within the rock itself. In Fanjingshan, isolation endured, leaving a fragment of ancient crust suspended above the present. In Shilin, time dissolved stone into complexity, turning a vanished sea into a labyrinth. In Zhangye, all of it becomes visible, not as separate events, but as one continuous process. This is not how a landscape is supposed to remain standing. But here, nature reveals something else entirely. Time does not simply erase. Sometimes it refines, removes, reveals. What remains is not simpler, but more precise. A world where structure survives, where time becomes visible, and where the land refuses to settle into a single form. This is China's hidden world. And this is what remains when time finishes its work.
Yeah!